People like you don't question me. Sit down, shut up, and know your place." Captain Derek Lawson's voice cut through the economy cabin like a whip loud enough for every passenger within 5 rows to freeze mid-motion. His silver captain's stripes gleamed under the harsh overhead lights as he towered over a black man in a plain gray hoodie, his finger jabbing toward the back of the plane with undisguised contempt. The man in the hoodie didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even stand up. He simply looked at the captain with calm, steady eyes that held something the pilot couldn't quite read. Something that should have warned him. Something that should have made him stop. But Captain Derek Lawson had been flying for 27 years. He had seniority. He had a union. He had power. And in his mind, the man sitting in seat 31B was nothing more than another piece of self-loading cargo who needed to be put in his place. He was about to learn how wrong he was. What Captain Lawson didn't know, what no one on that plane knew, was that in exactly 47 seconds the man he just humiliated would make a single phone call. And in 12 minutes, Derek Lawson's 27-year career would be over, terminated at 35,000 feet. By the very passenger he told to know his place. The man in the hoodie wasn't a troublemaker. He wasn't a complainer. He wasn't even a frequent flyer trying to score an upgrade. He was Nathaniel Crawford, founder-majority stockholder and CEO of Horizon Airways. The airline Captain Derek Lawson worked for. The airline he thought protected him. The airline he was about to lose everything to. Before we dive into this story, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. I see viewers from all over the world, and I love knowing who's here with me. And if you believe that respect shouldn't depend on what you wear, where you sit, or how much you paid for your ticket, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Because this one's going to stay with you long after it's over. We're about to witness what happens when arrogance meets accountability. When a man who thought he was untouchable discovers that the person he's been mocking holds all the power. And when an entire cabin full of passengers watches justice unfold at 35,000 feet. Trust me, you don't want to miss a single moment. Now let's rewind to 6:47 a.m. at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, where a billionaire decided to become invisible. The chaos of Chicago O'Hare International Airport was a familiar symphony to most travelers. Announcements echoing off high ceilings, coffee lines stretching past capacity, families rushing to gates while business travelers typed furiously on laptops. It was the organized chaos of modern air travel, the sound of beginnings and endings, of hurried goodbyes and joyful reunions. Among the crowd at Terminal 2 Gate C-19 sat a man no one noticed. He wore a plain gray hoodie, well-worn jeans, and simple white sneakers. A black baseball cap was pulled low over his face. No Rolex glinted on his wrist. No designer bag sat at his feet. No assistant hovered nearby with a tablet full of appointments. He looked like anyone. A teacher heading to a conference. A consultant flying to pitch a mid-sized firm. A regular guy in a middle seat. He was holding a boarding pass Group 5 Seat 31B economy. Flight 892 to Los Angeles. But Nathaniel Crawford was none of those things. At 44 years old, he was worth $4.2 billion. His face had graced the covers of Forbes Fortune and Bloomberg Businessweek. He had built Horizon Airways from 3 leased planes and a dream into a major national carrier with 847 aircraft. And today, he was here to see exactly how his company treated the people who couldn't fight back. He had no idea just how badly that test was about to go. Nathaniel Crawford had spent his entire adult life building things, building businesses, building opportunities, building an airline that was supposed to represent everything he believed in, that travel could be dignified, that service could be genuine, and that every passenger, regardless of their ticket price, deserved to be treated like a human being. He started with nothing. His mother cleaned houses in Atlanta. His father drove buses for the City Transit Authority for 31 years. They never took vacations. They never flew anywhere. The first time Nate ever set foot on an airplane was when he was 19 years old, flying to a job interview in Chicago on a scholarship he'd earned through sheer determination. He remembered that first flight like it was yesterday. The wonder of lifting off the ground, the view of clouds from above, the feeling that anything was possible if you could just get yourself into the right room, the right seat, the right opportunity. But he also remembered something else. The flight attendant who looked at his worn jacket and asked if he was sure he was in the right section. The passenger next to him who clutched her purse a little tighter when he sat down. The subtle unspoken message that he didn't quite belong. He had sworn then that if he ever had the power to change things, he would. 25 years later, he had that power. Horizon Airways was his. Every plane, every route, every employee answered ultimately to him. And for years he believed he had built something different, something better. Then the reports started coming in. 6 months ago, the data began telling a story Nate didn't want to hear. While Horizon's profits were strong, record-breaking, actually the customer complaint index was skyrocketing, up 340% in 18 months, 40% in reports of rude staff, dirty cabins, and a pervasive culture of indifference were flooding his executive team's inboxes. But it was the anonymous employee feedback that truly alarmed him. Words like toxic and hostile appeared again and again. Phrases like protected bullies and untouchable crew showed up in report after report. And one location kept surfacing more than any other: the Chicago crew base. His board of directors urged him to hire consultants, bring in outside experts, conduct surveys and focus groups, and all the corporate theater that made executives feel like they were doing something without actually changing anything. His COO, Catherine Shaw, had a more direct approach. She wanted to fly to Chicago herself and start firing people. Clean house, she called it. Send a message. But Nate knew something they didn't. He knew that a wolf in wolf's clothing is spotted a mile away. If he wanted to see the real airline, the airline his customers saw, he couldn't arrive as the CEO. He couldn't walk through the terminal with an entourage and a corner office aura that made everyone snap to attention. He had to become a customer. A customer with no power, no status, no leverage. A customer in economy. The idea had come to him late one night, reading through a particularly painful complaint from a woman who had been mocked by a flight attendant for asking about vegetarian meal options. She laughed at me, the woman wrote, in front of everyone, like I was stupid for even asking. Nate had read that line 3 times. Then he'd picked up his phone and called Catherine. "I'm going undercover," he told her. "Flight 892 Chicago to L.A. Book me an economy middle seat under the name Nathan Cole. I want to see what our passengers see." Catherine had tried to talk him out of it. Too risky, too unpredictable. What if something happened? What if someone recognized him? "That's exactly the point," Nate replied. "I want to know what happens when no one knows who I am. I want to feel what they feel." And so here he was, sitting at gate C-19 in a gray hoodie and jeans, a small digital recorder in his pocket, his phone's notes app ready for observations. No company phone, no identification that could trace back to his real identity, just a man waiting for a flight. Catherine knew his location. She'd insisted on that much for safety, but no one else did. To the world, Nathaniel Crawford was in meetings all day, unreachable, busy. To the passengers around him, he was just another traveler, another face in the crowd, another piece of self-loading cargo, as he'd once heard a disgruntled pilot call the people who kept his airline running. Nate watched the gate area with careful eyes. He noticed everything: the stained carpet that should have been replaced months ago, the flickering digital displays that gave the space a neglected, tired feeling, the Horizon Airways branding that looked faded and peeling at the edges. These were his planes, his gates, his responsibility. And they looked like no one cared. He thought about his father. William Crawford had driven that city bus for 31 years, and every single day he showed up in a pressed uniform with a smile for every passenger who boarded. "Every person on this bus is trusting me with their day," he used to say. "The least I can do is treat them like they matter." His father never made much money. He never got promotions or recognition. But he had something that no amount of success could buy: integrity. Nate wondered, sitting in that neglected gate area, how much of his father's integrity had survived in the company he'd built. How much of it had been diluted by growth, by scale, by the inevitable distance between a CEO and the people who actually served his customers. He was about to find out. A family walked past him, a young mother struggling with a toddler and an infant, her diaper bag threatening to spill its contents across the terminal floor. She looked exhausted, overwhelmed. The kind of tired that comes from being solely responsible for tiny humans who don't understand schedules or airports or anything except their own immediate needs. No one from the gate helped her. No one even looked up. Nate watched her struggle to find a seat to arrange her children to maintain some semblance of control over an uncontrollable situation. He made a mental note: gate staff engagement non-existent. Then he saw someone else. A young woman with dark hair and kind eyes breaking away from her own journey to help the struggling mother. She picked up a dropped pacifier. She offered a granola bar to the fussy toddler. She smiled and said something that made the mother's shoulders relax for the first time since she'd arrived. The young woman wore casual clothes and carried a professional-looking camera bag. A travel influencer, maybe, or a blogger. Someone who documented experiences for a living. Nate watched her help, and he felt a small spark of something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Maybe his airline wasn't completely broken. Maybe there were still good people out there doing the right thing without being asked. He was about to find out just how rare those people had become. The two gate agents at the Horizon Airways counter were putting on a masterclass in disinterest. Paul Henderson, according to his name tag, was a man in his late 30s with the kind of permanent frown that suggested he had chosen the wrong career about 15 years ago and had been taking it out on passengers ever since. He stood behind the counter, scrolling through his phone, barely glancing up when passengers approached. His colleague, Linda Torres, was younger, early 30s maybe, but she had clearly absorbed Paul's approach to customer service like a sponge absorbing apathy. She typed occasionally on her keyboard, but her eyes kept drifting to the clock as if counting down the minutes until she could be anywhere else. Nate watched them from his seat near the window, his baseball cap pulled low. He had positioned himself with a clear view of the gate desk, close enough to hear interactions but far enough to avoid drawing attention. The first test came quickly. An elderly couple approached the desk, moving slowly and carefully. The man, white-haired and stooped, supported his wife as she walked with a metal walker, each step a small victory against age and gravity. They looked nervous, the way people look when air travel has become more challenge than adventure. "Excuse me?" the woman said, her voice wavering slightly. "We requested wheelchair assistance when we booked. Is there someone who can help us?" Paul didn't look up from his phone. "If it's not in the system, it's not my problem. Call the number on your confirmation." The woman blinked, confused. "But we did call. 3 times. They said it would be arranged." Paul sighed with theatrical exhaustion. "I don't control what some call center told you. If it's not showing up on my screen, it doesn't exist. You'll have to figure it out. But my wife can barely walk. The gate is so far and—" "Sir," Paul held up a hand. "I have a flight to board. If you want to file a complaint, there's a customer service desk in Terminal 1. Next." The elderly couple stood there for a moment, stunned and hurt, before slowly shuffling away. The woman was crying. Her husband held her arm a little tighter, his jaw set with the quiet dignity of a man who had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. Nate's pen moved across his phone's notes app. "Gate agents, C-19 hostile dismissive, 0 solution orientation. Elderly couple denied wheelchair assistance, sent away crying. Names Paul Henderson, Linda Torres." He watched the couple struggle to find seats in the crowded gate area. The wife lowered herself painfully into a hard plastic chair. The husband stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, looking lost. Then the young woman Nate had noticed earlier, the one with the camera bag, appeared beside them. "Excuse me," she said, her voice warm and genuine. "I couldn't help but notice you were having trouble at the desk. Is there anything I can do to help?" The elderly man looked at her with surprise that softened into gratitude. "That's very kind of you, miss. We just need to get to the gate when it's time. My wife can't walk very far. I'm Sophia," the young woman said, already pulling out her phone. "Let me see if I can find someone who can actually help. And in the meantime, can I get you anything? Water? A snack?" Nate watched Sophia Ramirez, because that's who she was, though he didn't know her name yet, work her phone and her charm to track down an airport supervisor who promised to send a wheelchair. He watched her sit with the elderly couple, keeping them company, making them laugh. He made another note. Young woman traveler, possible influencer, proactive, empathetic. Exactly what we need. The second test came 10 minutes later. A Hispanic woman approached the gate desk, a toddler on her hip, and an infant in a carrier strapped to her chest. She looked exhausted, overwhelmed, and increasingly desperate. Her diaper bag was overflowing, and her toddler was reaching the end of his patience with airports and sitting still. "Excuse me," she said to Linda. "I called ahead about family boarding." The website said, "Family boarding is at the airline's discretion," Linda interrupted, not looking up from her keyboard. "We're not doing it today." But the website said, "The website says a lot of things. Our policy is our policy. You board with your group like everyone else." The woman's face crumpled. "But my son, he's only 2. If I can't get on early to set up, I won't be able to." Linda's voice hardened. "You're holding up the line. Board with group 4 like your ticket says. If you don't like it, drive next time." The mother stepped back, tears welling in her eyes. Her toddler, sensing her distress, began to cry. She bounced him on her hip, trying to soothe him while also trying not to fall apart herself. Nate felt his jaw tighten. He had written the family boarding policy himself years ago. It was supposed to be standard practice, not at the airline's discretion. Someone had changed it, or these agents had decided to ignore it. Either way, it was wrong. He watched Sophia Ramirez notice the struggling mother, watched her excuse herself from the elderly couple and approach with that same warm smile. "Hey, let me help you with some of that," Sophia said, taking the overflowing diaper bag. "What's your little guy's name, Miguel?" the mother said, her voice thick with gratitude. "And the baby's Anna. Beautiful names. Look, I don't know what's going on with that gate agent, but she's wrong. Let me help you figure this out." Nate watched Sophia reorganize the mother's bags, find a spare granola bar for the toddler, and generally transform a moment of crisis into something manageable. She didn't have to do any of it. She wasn't getting paid. She wasn't seeking recognition. She was just being decent. He looked back at Paul and Linda, who hadn't noticed any of this, who were too busy being indifferent to see the chaos they were creating and the stranger who was cleaning it up. This was his airline. These were his employees, and they were failing. The delay announcement came over the PA system, garbled and barely comprehensible. "Attention passengers for Flight 892. We are currently delayed awaiting crew arrival. Please stand by for updates." A collective groan went through the waiting area. Passengers shifted in their seats, checked watches, pulled out phones. The usual frustration of modern air travel, amplified by the uncertainty of not knowing how long they'd be stuck. Nate checked his own watch. The crew was late. 22 minutes late, to be exact. On a clear Tuesday morning with no weather delays, no mechanical issues, no external factors. Just indiscipline. He made another note. Crew late 22 minutes. No weather or mechanical excuse. Internal discipline issue. A businessman next to him muttered something about this damn airline and pulled out his laptop to make productive use of the wait. A teenager across the aisle put in earbuds and closed her eyes. The elderly couple sat quietly, still waiting for the wheelchair that had been promised. And Nate watched, observed, documented. He had come here looking for answers, looking to understand how his company had drifted so far from his vision. He hadn't expected the answers to be this obvious, this immediate, this damning. The gate area felt tired because no one cared enough to make it otherwise. The agents were hostile because no one had held them accountable. The crew was late because lateness had become acceptable. This wasn't one bad day. This was culture. This was habit. This was rot. And if the gate was this bad, he shuddered to think what the flight would be like. He didn't have to wait long to find out. They didn't walk. They swaggered. The crew for Flight 892 arrived at Gate C-19 like royalty entering a throne room, moving through the crowd of waiting passengers as if the mere existence of these people was an inconvenience to be tolerated rather than a reason for their employment. Their rollaboard bags clacked loudly on the tile floor. Their laughter echoed off the terminal walls. Not one of them offered an apology for being late. Not one of them seemed to notice the frustrated passengers who had been waiting, the elderly couple who still hadn't received their wheelchair, the young mother who was barely holding herself together. They simply parted the crowd and moved toward the gate desk like the delay was everyone else's problem. Leading them was the captain. Nate clocked him instantly. Tall, silver-haired, with a chiseled jaw, and the kind of permanent smirk that suggested he found most of life faintly amusing, and beneath him. His uniform was impeccable crisp white shirt, perfectly knotted tie, captain's stripes gleaming on his shoulders. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, but his eyes told a different story. They were bored, arrogant. The eyes of a man who had stopped caring about anything except his own comfort a long time ago. This was Captain Derek Lawson. Nate knew his name. He had read his file, or at least the summary of it, before flying out. Lawson was one of Horizon's most senior pilots. 27 years with the company. Thousands of hours in the cockpit. A record that looked impressive on paper. But the file also contained 47 customer complaints. 47 instances of passengers reporting rude behavior, dismissive attitudes, inappropriate comments. And 47 times those complaints had been swatted away by union representatives and sympathetic supervisors who valued seniority over service. The Chicago bully, one anonymous employee, had called him in a feedback survey. Everyone knows he's untouchable. Everyone knows he gets away with everything. And he knows it too. Walking beside Lawson was his first officer, a younger man with a nervous face and the demeanor of someone who had learned to go along to get along. His name tag read Brian Foster. He laughed at something the captain said, but the laugh seemed forced, uncomfortable. Behind them came the flight attendants. The senior attendant was a woman in her late 40s with blonde hair shellacked into a perfect helmet and makeup applied with severe precision. She walked close to Captain Lawson, laughing at his jokes a little too loudly, agreeing with his comments a little too eagerly. Her name tag identified her as Carol Preston. Nate knew her file too. 63 complaints in the last 5 years. A reputation among junior staff for being impossible to work with. She and Lawson had flown together for 15 years. A partnership that, according to anonymous feedback, had turned the Chicago crew base into their personal kingdom. Behind Carol came a younger woman, early 20s, with kind eyes and a nervous energy that stood in stark contrast to her colleagues. She was checking her tablet constantly. Her smile strained her posture tense. Unlike the others, she didn't seem to be enjoying the delayed arrival or the inconvenienced passengers. Her name tag read Elena Reyes. Nate watched her break away from the group as they approached the gate desk. While Captain Lawson and Carol Preston disappeared through the jet bridge without acknowledging anyone, Elena paused. She had spotted the young mother, the one with Miguel and baby Anna. "Hi there." Elena, said, kneeling down to the mother's level with a genuine smile. "I'm Elena. I'm on your flight today. Are you guys doing okay?" The mother, who had been fighting tears for the past half hour, looked at Elena like she was seeing an angel. They said we can't do family boarding, and I don't know how I'm going to—" Hey. Elena's voice was soft, reassuring. "I can't promise anything out here, but let me get on board and look at the seating chart. I'll do everything I can to help you get settled with your babies. What are your names?" "I'm Maria. And this is Miguel and Anna." "Beautiful family," Elena said. "I'll find you during boarding, okay? We're going to figure this out." Maria's face transformed. The desperation softened into hope. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Elena gave her one more warm smile before hurrying toward the jet bridge. As she passed Paul at the gate desk, Nate heard him mutter, "Stop wasting time on charity cases." Elena didn't respond, but her jaw tightened slightly and her pace quickened. Nate made a note. Elena Reyes. Proactive, empathetic, helps without being asked. Find out why she's junior and Carol Preston is senior. Fix that. He watched the last of the crew disappear onto the plane. The contrast between them couldn't have been more stark. On one side, arrogance, indifference, entitlement. On the other, compassion, initiative, genuine care. His airline was at war with itself, and he was pretty sure the wrong side was winning. A few minutes later, Captain Lawson's voice came over the gate area PA system transmitted from inside the aircraft. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Sorry for the delay, we hit some traffic." He chuckled at his own joke. "We'll be boarding shortly. Try not to rush the gate. We'll get to you when we get to you." The announcement clicked off. Nate stared at the jet bridge. Traffic. 22 minutes of crew delay, and the captain blamed traffic. With a joke. As if the dozens of people who had been waiting, who had rearranged their schedules, who had worried about connections, were just an inconvenience to be dismissed with a chuckle. This was the man flying his airplane. This was the culture he was protecting. Sofia Ramirez, who had returned to her seat near Nate, shook her head. "Wow," she said quietly to herself, already typing something into her phone. "This airline is something else." Nate didn't respond, but he silently agreed. The boarding process was about to begin. And he had a feeling that everything he had observed so far was just the prologue. The real story was waiting on that plane. Paul Henderson's voice crackled over the gate PA with all the enthusiasm of a man reading his own obituary. "We are now boarding Horizon Airways Flight 892 to Los Angeles. First class and premium passengers only. I repeat, first class and premium only. If you're not first class, step back from the boarding lane." The distinction was subtle but unmistakable. First-class passengers were welcomed with something approaching courtesy. The businessman in the expensive suit received a nod. The woman with the designer handbag got a right this way. Even their tickets were scanned with a certain reverence. But when the elderly couple, the Williamses, who had finally received their wheelchair assistance from a harried airport employee, approached the lane, Paul's demeanor shifted immediately. "Your group hasn't been called. Wait over there." "But they said we could pre-board because of the wheelchair." "I said wait. First class is still boarding. You'll go when I call you." The wheelchair assistant looked uncomfortable. "Sir, standard protocol is to board passengers requiring assistance before general boarding." "I know what protocol is," Paul snapped. "This is my gate. Wait." The elderly couple was pushed aside, literally pushed to make room for a man in business. Casual, who was definitely not first class, but who apparently looked more acceptable to Paul than two people in their 70s with mobility issues. Nate watched it all, documented it all, felt his stomach turn with each dismissive word, each casual cruelty, each small degradation inflicted on people who had done nothing wrong except exist in a space where Paul Henderson had power over them. Group 2 was called, then Group 3, then Group 4. The young mother Maria finally got to board with her children. She struggled down the jet bridge, toddler on her hip, infant crying bags threatening to spill everywhere. No one from the gate staff offered to help. No one even looked up. Finally, all remaining groups. Group 5, whatever's left. Just get on. That was the announcement. Not thank you for your patience. Not we appreciate you flying with us. Just whatever's left. Nate stood up, pulled his baseball cap lower, and joined the shuffle of remaining passengers moving toward the jet bridge. He was surrounded by tired people, frustrated people, people who had been waiting for over an hour and had been treated like inconveniences the entire time. He was just another face in the crowd, just another seat filler, just another piece of self-loading cargo as he'd heard pilots call passengers when they thought no one important was listening. The irony wasn't lost on him. He owned this airline. Every plane, every route, every employee. He had spent 20 years building something he was proud of. And now he was shuffling onto one of his own aircraft, like a peasant approaching a castle he would never be allowed to enter. But that was exactly the point. He had wanted to know what his customers experienced, what it felt like to be treated like nothing, what it felt like to have your time disrespected, your dignity dismissed, your basic humanity overlooked. Now he knew, and he hated every second of it. The jet bridge was narrow and stuffy, the recycled air already tasting stale. Ahead of him, passengers shuffled forward in that awkward half-walk that characterized airplane boarding everywhere. Behind him, more passengers pressed forward, eager to escape the gate area that had been their prison for the past hour. A woman in front of him was trying to comfort her daughter, who was asking why the airplane people were so mean. The mother had no answer. A man behind him was muttering into his phone about connections and meetings, and how he was going to miss everything because this damn airline couldn't get its crew to the gate on time. And somewhere up ahead, Captain Derek Lawson was waiting. The man who had been 22 minutes late and blamed it on traffic. The man with 47 complaints in his file and 0 consequences. The man who ran the Chicago crew base like his personal kingdom and treated passengers like subjects who should be grateful for the privilege of his attention. Nate was about to meet him face to face. He stepped onto the plane. The air inside the Airbus A321 was stale and heavy, the kind of recycled atmosphere that made you wonder when anyone had last actually cared about the passenger experience. Nate stepped through the forward door and was greeted not with a smile, but with a wall of indifference. Carol Preston stood at the galley entrance, her back half-turned to the boarding passengers. She was deep in conversation with Captain Derek Lawson, who had emerged from the cockpit and was leaning against the bulkhead with his arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. They were gossiping, loudly enough for the first several rows of first class to hear. Loudly enough that they clearly didn't care who was listening. "So I told this guy," Carol was saying, her voice carrying that nasal quality of someone who loved the sound of her own complaints. "If you don't like the temperature, fly private." You should have seen his face. Captain Lawson laughed a booming, confident sound. "That's nothing. This tech bro last week tried to tell me about wind patterns over the Rockies. I asked him if his weather app was FAA certified. Shut him right up." More laughter. More bonding over their shared contempt for the people who paid their salaries. Nate walked past them, his head down, his baseball cap pulled low. As he passed, Captain Lawson's eyes swept over him, over the gray hoodie, the worn jeans, the simple sneakers, with a look of undisguised contempt. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, Nate saw exactly who Derek Lawson was. A man who judged people instantly by their appearance. A man who decided in a single glance who mattered and who didn't. A man who had looked at Nate and seen nothing worth his attention. Nate kept walking. He made his way down the narrow aisle past first class with its wider seats and complimentary champagne, past business class with its extra legroom and power outlets into the cramped reality of economy. The seats got narrower. The overhead bins got more crowded. The air got thicker. He found his row 31. Middle seat. B. A large man was already in the window seat, his bulk spilling over the armrest. He gave Nate an apologetic look but didn't move. Couldn't move, really. The seats were barely designed for average-sized humans, let alone anyone larger. In the aisle seat was a young man, maybe 22 or 23, who was gripping the armrest like his life depended on it. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, his eyes darting around the cabin with barely contained panic. First-time flyer Nate recognized immediately. Probably terrified. He squeezed past the young man's knees and settled into his seat. The middle seat. The worst seat. The seat no one wanted and everyone pretended didn't exist. First flight, he asked the young man quietly. The kid startled, then blushed. That obvious little bit. But you'll be fine. Takeoff's the worst part, and even that's pretty smooth these days. I'm Jason, the young man said, clearly grateful for any distraction from his anxiety. Jason Mitchell, Nate replied. Nice to meet you. They shook hands awkwardly over the armrest. Jason seemed to relax just slightly, the presence of a calm stranger, apparently helping more than all the deep breathing he'd been attempting. Elena Reyes appeared in the aisle, working her way through the cabin. Unlike Carol, she was actually engaging with passengers, checking on comfort, answering questions, radiating a warmth that felt foreign after everything Nate had observed so far. She reached their row and smiled genuinely. Welcome aboard. How are we doing back here? We're good, Nate said. Thank you. Elena turned to Jason, noticing his white-knuckled grip on the armrest. First time flying. Jason nodded, too embarrassed to speak. You're going to do great, Elena said, her voice kind and encouraging. It's totally normal to be nervous. Can I get you some water? It helps. Yes, please, Jason managed. Thank you. She moved on, still smiling, still helping, still being the only bright spot in a cabin full of indifference. Nate watched her go and made a mental note. Elena Reyes. Get her name to Catherine. This is what our employees should be. The contrast with Carol Preston couldn't have been more stark. As Elena moved through the cabin, spreading warmth, Carol stomped through collecting trash with the enthusiasm of someone cleaning up after people she despised. When a passenger asked Carol about overhead bin space, she snapped, "Figure it out yourself. We're not personal shoppers." When another passenger asked about a blanket, Carol rolled her eyes. "We ran out. Should have brought your own." 2 flight attendants, 2 completely different approaches, one building goodwill, the other destroying it with every interaction. The cabin continued to fill. Nate saw Sofia Ramirez take a seat across the aisle, and a few rows back her camera bag stowed carefully beneath the seat in front of her. She was already typing notes into her phone documenting her experience. He saw Mrs. Dorothy Collins, a dignified white-haired woman, who had been sitting near him in the gate area, take a seat 2 rows ahead. She was reading a paperback novel, seemingly unbothered by the chaos around her. He saw Dr. Victoria Palmer, a sharply dressed woman he had noticed in the first-class boarding queue, settling into seat 4A, with a tablet full of what looked like medical files. All these strangers thrown together by chance and scheduling about to share an experience none of them could have predicted. The cabin door closed with a heavy thunk. Captain Lawson's voice came over the PA system, dripping with false charm. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. Flight 892 to Los Angeles. We apologize for the minor delay. We're making up for lost time as we speak. Flight time today is approximately 3 hours and 15 minutes. Sit back, stay quiet, and let us get you there in one piece. He laughed at his own joke. It was the laugh of a man who thought he was funny and had never been told otherwise. Nate stared at the seat back in front of him and thought, 3 hours. Plenty of time for this crew to show me who they really are. He had no idea how right he was. The takeoff was smooth. The engines roared, the cabin rattled, and the ground dropped away beneath them with that stomach-flipping sensation that still, after all these years, gave Nate a small thrill. Beside him, Jason had his eyes squeezed shut and his hands gripping both armrests like he was trying to keep the plane in the air through sheer force of will. "You're doing great," Nate said quietly. "The worst part's over." Jason opened one eye, then the other. The plane was climbing steadily, the Chicago suburbs shrinking to a patchwork of browns and greens below. His grip loosened slightly. "That wasn't so bad," he admitted. "Never is. The anticipation's always worse than the reality." They fell into an easy silence as the plane leveled off and the seatbelt sign remained illuminated. Nate watched the cabin around him, observing the small dramas and interactions that made up the ecosystem of a commercial flight. In first class, the service had already begun. Elena and another junior attendant were offering warm towels, champagne, and the kind of personalized attention that justified the price differential. In business class, drinks were being served with reasonable efficiency. But in economy, nothing. Silence. Waiting. Carol Preston emerged from the forward galley and began walking through the economy cabin with all the enthusiasm of a prison guard doing a head count. She didn't make eye contact with passengers. She didn't smile. She didn't acknowledge questions or concerns. An older man in row 25 raised his hand to get her attention. "Excuse me, any idea when we'll get beverage service?" Carol stopped, turned slowly and fixed him with a stare that could have frozen coffee. "When we get to it," she said flatly. "Some of us have to serve first class first. You know, the passengers who actually pay for service." The man blinked, stunned. I didn't mean to. If you need something that badly, there's a lavatory at the back. Otherwise, wait your turn." She moved on without another word, leaving the man sitting in embarrassed silence while passengers around him exchanged uncomfortable glances. Nate made a note, Carol Preston openly dismissive to economy passengers. Passengers who actually pay for service. Hostile, contemptuous. 20 minutes passed. The beverage cart finally began its slow journey through economy, pushed by Carol with an expression that suggested this task was beneath her dignity. When she reached Nate's row, she didn't speak. She simply stood there, eyebrows raised, waiting. "Water, please," Nate said politely. Carol poured a cup barely half full and thrust it toward him without making eye contact. Water sloshed over the rim and dripped onto Nate's jeans. "Oops," she said, not sounding sorry at all. She moved on before he could respond. Jason, who had finally relaxed enough to loosen his grip on the armrests, stared at the departing flight attendant with shock. "Did she just—" "Yeah," Nate said quietly. "She did. Can she do that? Is that normal?" Nate looked at the wet spot on his jeans, then at Carol's retreating back. "It shouldn't be." He pulled out his phone and typed another note. "Carol Preston spilled water on me. No apology. Intentional, established pattern." The atmosphere in the cabin was oppressive. Not the physical atmosphere, though, that was bad enough with the recycled air and the cramped seats, and the general feeling of being packed into a space designed for people slightly smaller than actual humans. The emotional atmosphere was what struck Nate most. Passengers were tense, quiet. They spoke in whispers when they spoke at all, as if afraid of drawing attention to themselves. They didn't ask for help. They didn't press call buttons. They just endured. This was what his airline had become. A place where customers paid money to be treated like inconveniences, where service meant we'll get to it when we feel like it, where employees openly mocked the people whose tickets paid their salaries. Captain Lawson's voice crackled over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. Weather looks good, should be a smooth ride. Feel free to move about the cabin, but try not to bother the flight crew too much. They've got important work to do." He laughed again, that same self-satisfied chuckle that suggested he was the funniest person he knew. "Try not to bother the flight crew too much." Nate had written every word of Horizon's customer service guidelines himself. He had personally approved the training programs. He had given speeches about the importance of passenger experience, about treating every customer like they mattered, about the fundamental dignity that every person deserved regardless of their ticket class. And now his own captain was telling passengers not to bother the crew. Something was deeply, fundamentally broken, and it started at the top of this aircraft. As if on cue, Captain Derek Lawson emerged from the cockpit. It was unusual for a captain to walk through the cabin mid-flight, unusual enough that several passengers looked up in surprise. Captains typically stayed in the cockpit, focused on the complex task of flying several hundred tons of metal through the atmosphere at 500 miles per hour. But Derek Lawson wasn't interested in flying at the moment. He was interested in being seen. He walked through first class, first nodding at passengers like a politician working a crowd. A handshake here, a comment about the weather there. He stopped to chat with Dr. Victoria Palmer, complimenting her taste in wine, completely unaware that she was already mentally cataloging his behavior for future reference. Then he moved into business class, same routine. Charm and swagger, confidence bordering on arrogance. He was performing, and he knew it. Then he entered economy. His demeanor shifted immediately. The smile didn't disappear entirely, but it became something else harder, more contemptuous. This wasn't his audience. These weren't people worth impressing. He walked down the aisle, slowly letting passengers see him, letting them appreciate the privilege of sharing space with someone so important. When a child waved at him, he ignored her. When an elderly man tried to ask a question about turbulence, he said, "I don't do Q&A," and kept walking. And then he reached row 31. He stopped, looked down at Nate, took in the hoodie, the baseball cap, the simple clothing that marked him as unremarkable. His lip curled slightly. "Comfortable?" he asked. The word dripped with sarcasm. "Fine. Thank you." Nate replied evenly. Derek's eyes lingered on the wet spot on Nate's jeans where Carol had spilled water. Rough start to the flight. Something like that. Well, Derek straightened his uniform jacket, a preening gesture that ensured everyone noticed the captain's stripes on his shoulders. "Try not to cause any trouble back here. Economy passengers tend to get restless." He moved on before Nate could respond, continuing his royal procession through the cabin. But something in his posture had changed. Something about Nate's calm, steady response had bothered him. Most passengers looked away when Derek addressed them. They apologized. They shrunk. They recognized power and deferred to it. This man hadn't. This man in the hoodie had met Derek's eyes and held them, had responded without groveling, had refused to be diminished. Derek didn't like it. He filed it away in his mind and continued his walk, unaware that the man he'd just dismissed was already planning his professional funeral. The drink service was over, but Carol Preston's campaign of contempt was just beginning. 40 minutes into the flight, she reappeared in the economy cabin with a trash bag, making her way down the aisle with the enthusiasm of someone being punished for crimes in a past life. She snatched cups from passengers without asking if they were finished. She dropped napkins and didn't pick them up. She sighed audibly at every piece of trash she collected, as if each item was a personal affront. When she reached Nate's row, she stopped. She stood there for a long moment looking at him with an expression Nate couldn't quite read. Appraisal, contempt. Something else entirely. Then she did something unexpected. She pulled a small aerosol can from her apron air freshener, the same generic brand used in airline lavatories, and sprayed it directly over Nate's row. The chemical scent was overwhelming artificial flowers mixed with something astringent that burned the back of the throat. "This section could use some freshening up," she said loudly. Loudly enough for passengers in surrounding rows to hear. Loudly enough that her meaning was unmistakable. She wasn't refreshing the air. She was making a statement. A statement about the kind of person she thought belonged in this section of the plane. Passengers turned to look, some with surprise, some with discomfort, a few with something worse understanding. They knew exactly what Carol was implying. Jason, sitting next to Nate, looked like he'd been slapped. His mouth opened, then closed, unable to process what he'd just witnessed. The large man by the window pretended to be asleep, desperate to avoid involvement in whatever was happening. But Nate didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't give Carol the reaction she was clearly hoping for. "Is there a problem?" he asked quietly. Carol's smile was ice. "No problem at all. Just doing my job. Your job includes spraying passengers with air freshener." Her smile flickered. "I sprayed the section. If you took offense, that's your issue." She moved on, but the damage was done. The chemical cloud hung over Nate's row, a physical reminder of what had just happened. Passengers were whispering. Some were pulling out phones. Sofia Ramirez, 3 rows back, had her phone in her hand. She hadn't recorded the incident, it had happened too fast, but she was typing furiously, documenting everything she'd seen. Her jaw was tight with anger. Mrs. Dorothy Collins, 2 rows ahead, had put down her paperback novel. She turned in her seat to look back at Nate, her expression a mixture of sympathy and something harder, something that looked like resolve. And from first class, Dr. Victoria Palmer was watching. She had stood up to use the lavatory, but had paused in the aisle, pretending to stretch, actually observing. She had seen Carol spray the air freshener. She had seen the malice in the gesture. She made a mental note of the flight attendant's name badge and continued to the lavatory, already composing the complaint she would file when they landed. Elena Reyes, who had been working the forward galley, appeared in the economy cabin moments later. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright with barely contained distress. She had heard what happened, of course she had. Carol's voice had carried, and she was mortified. She approached Nate's row cautiously, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "Sir, I'm so sorry. That was completely inappropriate. Are you okay? Can I get you anything?" Nate looked at her, really looked at her, and saw genuine anguish in her eyes. This wasn't a performance. This wasn't damage control. She was actually upset. "I'm fine," he said. "Thank you for asking." "I want you to know," Elena said quietly, leaning closer so other passengers couldn't hear. "That's not who we are, or who we should be. I'm ashamed of what just happened. It's not your fault." "It feels like it is. I work here. I represent this airline. And when someone on my crew does something like that..." She shook her head, unable to finish the thought. Nate saw something in her then. Not just kindness, not just empathy, but something rarer, moral courage. The willingness to acknowledge wrongdoing even when staying silent would be easier. The refusal to be complicit through inaction. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena. Elena Reyes." "Elena, you have nothing to apologize for. You're the only person on this crew who seems to remember that passengers are human beings. Don't lose that." Her eyes glistened. She nodded once sharply and moved on to check on other passengers, unable to say more without breaking down entirely. But her brief appearance hadn't gone unnoticed. Carol was watching from the forward galley, and she wasn't happy. 5 minutes later, Elena was summoned to the galley for what Carol called a quick chat. Nate couldn't hear what was said, but he could see Elena's body language through the gap in the curtain, shoulders hunched, head down, nodding at whatever Carol was saying. When Elena emerged, her face was red and her eyes were wet. She didn't look in Nate's direction. She went straight to the rear galley and didn't reappear for 30 minutes. Whatever Carol had said to her, it had worked. The good employee had been silenced. The bad one had won. This was the culture of his airline. This was what 20 years of building had produced, a place where cruelty was protected and kindness was punished. Nate felt something shift inside him. He had come here to observe, to gather evidence, to understand the problem before solving it. But this wasn't just a problem. This was a betrayal of everything he'd tried to build, everything he believed in. And sitting here in seat 31B with water stains on his jeans and the chemical smell of air freshener burning his nose, he made a decision. This wasn't going to be fixed with consultants and surveys and corporate theater. This was going to be fixed the old-fashioned way. Someone was going to be held accountable. Today, on this flight, in front of witnesses. He just had to wait for the right moment. It came sooner than he expected. Dr. Victoria Palmer had spent 20 years in emergency medicine. She had seen trauma that would break most people. She had made life and death decisions under pressure that most humans would never experience. She had developed an unshakable calm that served her well in operating rooms and catastrophe sites. But watching Carol Preston spray air freshener at a passenger, a clear act of targeted humiliation, had cracked something in that calm. She returned to her first-class seat and pulled out her phone typing notes with surgical precision. Time approximately 10 to 45 a.m. Location row 31, economy cabin. Senior flight attendant named Carol Preston deliberately sprayed air freshener in immediate proximity to African-American male passenger. Action appeared targeted. Passenger maintained composure. No apology offered. Dr. Palmer knew discrimination when she saw it. She had experienced enough of it herself over the years. The surprised looks when she introduced herself as the chief surgeon. The questions about whether she was really a doctor. The assumptions that she must be a nurse or an orderly or anything other than the person in charge. Her father had faced worse. He had come to this country as a migrant worker picking crops in California's Central Valley until his hands bled. He had put himself through nursing school while working full-time, eventually becoming one of the most respected nurses in his hospital. But even then, even with decades of service and expertise, there were always people who looked at his brown skin and saw something less than human. Her mother had cleaned houses to help pay for Victoria's education, had scraped together every penny to buy textbooks and lab coats and all the expensive necessities of medical school, had lived to see her daughter become a chief of surgery at one of the best hospitals in the country. Victoria carried their sacrifices with her every day, and she would be damned if she was going to sit in first class sipping champagne while someone was humiliated 3 sections behind her. She made a decision. When this flight landed, she was filing a formal complaint, with names, dates, times, and her professional credentials attached. Let the airline try to dismiss that. 2 rows ahead of Nate, Mrs. Dorothy Collins had seen everything too. At 76 years old, Dorothy had lived through more history than most people read about in textbooks. She had been a child during the civil rights movement, had watched the marches on television, had grown up in a household where her parents spoke quietly about the world changing sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. She had spent 52 years as an elementary school teacher in Chicago's South Side, teaching third graders who came from every imaginable background. Rich kids and poor kids, black kids and white kids and brown kids, kids who had plenty and kids who had nothing except the potential that Dorothy believed existed in every single one of them. She had retired 5 years ago, but she never stopped seeing the world through a teacher's eyes. She never stopped noticing when someone was being bullied. She never stopped feeling that fierce, protective instinct that had made her the kind of teacher kids remembered for the rest of their lives. And right now, that instinct was screaming. The man in row 31, the one in the hoodie, the one Carol Preston had just publicly humiliated, reminded her of something. Of someone. Of the countless children over the years who had been singled out, mocked, dismissed because of what they looked like or where they came from. She had spent her career fighting for those children. She wasn't about to stop now just because she was retired and sitting on an airplane. She turned around in her seat and made eye contact with the man. She gave him a small nod, just a recognition, an acknowledgement that she saw what had happened and she wasn't okay with it. He nodded back. A slight smile crossed his face there and gone. Dorothy turned forward again and picked up her paperback, but she wasn't reading. She was thinking, planning, preparing for whatever came next. Because in her experience, bullies never stopped at one victim. They always pushed until someone pushed back. Sophia Ramirez was furious. She had been a travel influencer for 5 years, building her platform from nothing to 2.1 million followers through a combination of honest reviews, stunning photography, and a willingness to call out bad behavior when she saw it. She had become known as someone who told the truth, who didn't sugarcoat bad experiences just because an airline had sponsored her trip or a hotel had comped her room. Her followers trusted her. And right now she was witnessing something that her followers needed to see. The air freshener incident had been bad, but it was what came after that really disturbed her. The senior flight attendant, Carol, according to her name tag, had pulled aside the younger attendant, Elena, and apparently torn into her for apologizing to the passenger. Sophia couldn't hear what was said, but she could see the aftermath. Elena's red eyes, her hunched posture, the way she avoided the economy cabin entirely afterward. This wasn't just bad service. This was a toxic environment. A workplace where doing the right thing got you punished, and doing the wrong thing got you protected. Sophia opened her Instagram and typed a draft currently on Horizon Airways Flight 892. What I'm witnessing is disturbing. Senior crew members openly hostile to passengers. Junior crew member apparently punished for showing kindness. More to come. She didn't post it yet. She wanted more evidence first. But her finger hovered over the live button ready to stream at a moment's notice. Jason Mitchell, sitting next to Nate, was having an experience he hadn't anticipated when he booked this flight. He was 22 years old, a first-generation college graduate flying to Los Angeles for the most important job interview of his life. A tech startup had found his resume, liked his portfolio, and invited him to their offices for an in-person interview. It was the opportunity he'd been working toward for 4 years of community college and 2 years of state university studying web development while working part-time at a warehouse to pay his bills. He had saved for 6 months to afford this ticket, had carefully planned his outfit, khakis from Target, a button-down shirt from Ross Shoes, polished until they shone. He wanted to look professional, respectable, like someone who belonged in a room with tech executives making 6 figures. And then he got on this flight and watched a crew member spray air freshener at the man sitting next to him, apparently because of how he looked. It hit Jason harder than he expected, because he recognized that fear, the fear of not belonging, of being judged, of being seen as less than. He had felt it his entire life, growing up poor, being the first in his family to go to college, constantly wondering if he was good enough, if he fit in, if the people around him saw him as an equal or as someone who had somehow snuck in through a back door. The man in the hoodie, Nathan, he'd said his name was, hadn't flinched when Carol sprayed that air freshener, hadn't yelled or complained or made a scene. He just sat there calm and composed as if he knew something no one else did. Jason wanted to be like that. Wanted to have that kind of quiet confidence that couldn't be shaken by the cruelty of small people. "Hey," he said quietly to Nathan. "What that lady did, that was really messed up." "Yeah," Nathan agreed. "It was. How do you stay so calm?" Nathan considered the question for a moment. "Practice," he said finally. "And perspective. People who act like that are usually the ones who are scared. Scared of what? Of being seen for who they really are." Jason thought about that for a long moment. It was the kind of wisdom that felt true the moment you heard it. The kind of thing his grandmother might have said if she were still alive. "You're pretty smart," Jason said. Nathan smiled. "I've had some good teachers." Captain Derek Lawson was bored. This happened sometimes on longer flights. The autopilot was engaged. The first officer was monitoring systems, and there was nothing for Derek to do except sit in his seat and wait. He hated waiting, hated the inactivity, hated feeling like the machine was doing the work while he collected the salary. So he did what he often did when boredom struck. He went looking for entertainment. He emerged from the cockpit for the second time, ostensibly to stretch his legs. In reality, he wanted to feel important, wanted to walk through his domain and remind everyone who was in charge, wanted passengers to look at him with the awe and respect that his uniform demanded. The first-class cabin gave him what he wanted. Heads turned. People smiled. A businessman actually stood up to shake his hand and ask about the weather in Los Angeles. Derek basked in the attention, spending several minutes regaling the businessman with stories of difficult flights and dramatic landings. Business class was similarly gratifying. Professional nods, appreciative glances, the general sense that he was someone worth acknowledging. And then there was economy. Derek walked into the rear cabin with his usual swagger, but something was different this time. The passengers weren't looking at him with awe. Some weren't looking at him at all. Others were looking with something that resembled... Was that hostility? He noticed phones out, noticed whispered conversations, noticed an atmosphere that felt charged electric like the moments before a storm. Something had happened while he was in the cockpit, something that had shifted the mood. He walked down the aisle, searching for the source of the tension, and found it in row 31. The man in the hoodie was sitting exactly where Derek had left him, but something was different. He was typing on his phone, his expression focused and intent. Not aggressive, not upset, just concentrated, like he was working on something important. Derek stopped at the row, looking down at the man with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. Working on the great American novel, the man looked up. Those same calm, steady eyes. That same refusal to be intimidated. Something like that. What's it about customer experience, actually? Derek's smirk flickered. Customer experience. Who was this guy? Some kind of consultant, a blogger, one of those social media people who were always trying to catch service workers doing something wrong. Customer experience, Derek repeated, letting the words drip with condescension. In economy. The experience is pretty simple. You paid less, you get less. That's how it works. Is that Horizon Airways' official position? The question was simple, but something about it set off alarm bells in Derek's head. The man wasn't asking for information, he was gathering it, recording it maybe in that phone he'd been typing into. Who are you? Derek asked, his voice harder now. Some kind of reporter. Just a curious passenger. A curious passenger with a lot of notes. Is that a problem? Derek stepped closer, invading the man's space the way he'd done to countless passengers over the years. Most people backed down, apologized, made themselves smaller. This man didn't move. Let me give you some free advice. Derek said, his voice low and threatening. Don't start trouble at 35,000 feet. You won't like how it ends. I'm not starting anything, Captain. Good, keep it that way, because I've been flying for 27 years. I've seen every kind of passenger there. The complainers, the lawyers, the social media crusaders who think they're going to change the world with a viral video. You know what happens to all of them? Nothing. They file their complaints. They post their tweets and nothing changes. Because at the end of the day, I'm still the captain and they're still passengers. And passengers don't have power. He straightened up, satisfied with his speech, and turned to walk away. Captain Lawson. The man's voice stopped him. Derek turned back, eyebrows raised. Your name is Derek Lawson, correct? 27 years with the company. Something cold slithered down Derek's spine. How did this passenger know his name? He hadn't introduced himself. The name wasn't visible on his uniform. "That's right," Derek said carefully. "Why?" The man in the hoodie smiled. Just a small curve of the lips barely there and gone. "No reason. Just wanted to make sure I had it right for my notes." Derek stared at him for a long moment, trying to read something in those calm eyes, trying to understand what was happening here. But there was nothing to read. Just a stillness that was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. "Watch yourself," Derek said finally, and walked away. He didn't look back. If he had, he might have seen the man in the hoodie making another note in his phone, might have seen the tiny smile that played at the corners of his mouth. But Derek Lawson was already thinking about other things. About lunch service. About the attractive passenger in 3A. About the golf game he was planning for the weekend. He had already forgotten the man in the hoodie. Already dismissed him as another nobody trying to feel important. It was a mistake he would regret for the rest of his life. Behind Derek's retreating back, other things were happening. Mrs. Collins had turned around in her seat during the confrontation, watching with sharp teacher's eyes. She had seen Derek lean into the passenger's space, had heard the threat in his voice, had witnessed the attempted intimidation. And she had seen the passenger refuse to be intimidated. That took courage, she thought. Real courage. The kind most people don't have. Sofia Ramirez had been recording. Not obviously, she'd held her phone at an angle that made it look like she was texting, but she had gotten the entire exchange. Derek's condescension, his threats, his casual cruelty, and the passenger's calm, measured responses. "This is getting serious," she typed to her assistant back in LA. "Stand by. I might be going live." Dr. Palmer, who had been watching from the galley entrance where she'd been getting a glass of water, returned to her seat with additional ammunition for her complaint. Add intimidation to the list, she thought. Threats. Abuse of authority. This captain is a lawsuit waiting to happen. And Jason, sitting right next to the man everyone seemed to be watching, had a revelation. "You're not just a regular passenger, are you?" he whispered. Nathan looked at him with those calm eyes. "What makes you say that? The way you handled that. The way you're not scared. The way he seemed almost scared of you at the end." Nathan considered the question for a moment. Then he said simply, "Today, I'm just a guy in a middle seat. Tomorrow might be different." Jason didn't understand what that meant, but he had a feeling he was about to find out. 90 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft chime. First Officer Brian Foster's voice came over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting some light turbulence ahead. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. This shouldn't last long and we'll have you up and moving again shortly." Passengers settled in. Overhead bins rattled slightly as the plane began to bounce gently on invisible air currents. Nothing serious, just the usual discomfort of crossing a weather front. Captain Derek Lawson emerged from the cockpit again. This was unusual. During turbulence, even light turbulence pilots typically remained in their seats with harnesses secured. Walking through the cabin during bumpy conditions was against standard protocols and potentially dangerous. But Derek wasn't thinking about protocols. He was thinking about the man in row 31, about those calm eyes that had refused to look away, about the questions that had felt more like interrogation than curiosity, about the nagging feeling that something was wrong, that this passenger knew something Derek didn't. He was carrying a cup of coffee. Hot. Fresh from the cockpit's personal brewing station. Carol Preston met him at the forward galley, eyebrows raised in question. Derek leaned close and murmured something. Carol smiled a cold, knowing smile and nodded. They walked together into the economy cabin. Nate saw them coming. Of course he did. He'd been watching everything, cataloging everything, building a case that was becoming more damning with every passing hour. He saw the coffee cup in Derek's hand, saw the synchronized approach, saw the intent in both their faces. He knew what was about to happen, and he let it happen anyway, because sometimes the only way to expose a rot is to let it show itself, to give the disease a chance to demonstrate its severity, to let the guilty condemn themselves with their own actions. Derek stopped at row 31. Carol stopped behind him, partially blocking the aisle. "Thought I'd check on our economy passengers," Derek said, his voice carrying the false cheerfulness of a man about to do something cruel. "Making sure everyone's comfortable back here in cattle class." Nate looked up at him. "We're fine, Captain. Thank you for your concern. Just doing my job." Derek took a sip of his coffee, letting the pause stretch. "You know, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier, about customer experience. Have you? I have. And I realized I never gave you the full experience. The authentic Horizon Airways economy experience." Before Nate could respond, before anyone could respond, the plane hit a pocket of turbulence. Just a small bump, just enough to provide cover. Derek stumbled. His coffee cup tilted. Hot liquid poured directly onto Nate's lap. The pain was immediate and sharp, not scalding enough to cause serious burns, but hot enough to hurt, hot enough to soak through his jeans, hot enough to be unmistakably, unquestionably intentional. "Oops." Derek's voice was flat, expressionless, utterly unapologetic. Turbulence. Should have held on tighter. He didn't offer napkins. He didn't check if Nate was injured. He didn't do any of the things a decent human being would do after spilling hot liquid on another person. Instead, he looked down at Nate's stained jeans and smiled. "Maybe dress for the occasion next time. Hoodies aren't exactly first class." He turned and walked away, Carol following behind him, their shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. The cabin erupted. "Oh my God." Jason was on his feet, grabbing napkins from his tray table, pressing them against Nate's jeans. "Are you okay? Did he just..." "I'm fine." Nate's voice was calm. Impossibly calm, given what had just happened. The coffee wasn't boiling. "It's uncomfortable, but I'm not burned." "That wasn't an accident." Jason's voice cracked with outrage. "He did that on purpose, I saw him." He aimed. From 2 rows ahead, Mrs. Dorothy Collins was already standing, moving toward Nate's row with the determination of a woman who had spent half a century dealing with bullies. "Sweetheart, let me see." She took the napkins from Jason's hands, her movements practiced and efficient. "I've handled my share of spills over the years. Third graders aren't known for their coordination." She helped Nate blot the worst of the liquid from his jeans. Her face set in lines of righteous anger. "That man," she said quietly, so only Nate could hear, "is going to regret what he just did. I don't know who you are. I don't know why he targeted you. But I have been a witness to injustice before, and I don't intend to be silent." "Thank you," Nate said. "That means more than you know." Sophia Ramirez was already out of her seat. Phone raised, recording everything. She had captured the immediate aftermath, Jason's panicked attempts to help Mrs. Collins's intervention, the spreading stain on Nate's jeans. She hadn't caught the incident itself, it had happened too fast, but she had caught enough. "You guys," she said into her phone, going live for the first time. "I'm on Horizon Airways Flight 892 right now. The captain just accidentally spilled hot coffee on a passenger. I'm showing you the aftermath. This man asked a simple question about an overhead bin, and he got coffee dumped on him." She panned her camera to show Nate the wet fabric of his jeans, Mrs. Collins helping with napkins. "This is live. This is happening. Over 35,000 people are watching right now." The flight attendant sprayed air freshener at this same passenger earlier. Now the captain poured coffee on him. "This is not an accident. This is targeted harassment." Her viewer count was climbing. 40,000. 50,000. 60,000. Comments were flooding in faster than she could read. But the most significant arrival was Dr. Victoria Palmer. She had moved from first class the moment she heard the commotion pushing past Carol Preston with barely a glance. Now she was kneeling beside Nate's seat, her professional demeanor fully engaged. "Sir, I'm a physician. I need to assess whether you've been burned. May I?" "I'm fine, really. Let me determine that." Her voice was firm but kind. The voice of someone who was used to patients saying they were fine when they weren't. Hot liquid burns can be deceptive. They may not show full severity immediately. She examined the area gently professionally. The jeans absorbed most of the heat. You'll have some mild discomfort, possibly minor redness, but I don't see signs of anything requiring immediate treatment. However, I want to document this. She pulled out her phone and took several photos of Nate's jeans, the stains the area around his seat. "I'm Dr. Victoria Palmer," she said, "Chief of Trauma Surgery at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I witnessed that captain pour coffee on you. It was not an accident. I'm prepared to testify to that fact." "Thank you," Nate said. "Don't thank me. What just happened was assault. In my emergency room, I've treated victims of violence who were hurt less severely than this man intended to hurt you. He just happened to get lucky that the coffee had cooled enough not to cause serious damage." She stood up, her professional calm barely containing her fury. "I will be filing a formal complaint when we land, with names, dates, times, and my medical credentials attached. I suggest anyone else who witnessed this do the same." Mrs. Collins raised her hand. "I witnessed it." Jason raised his trembling hand. "Me too." Other passengers began raising their hands, one by one, then in groups. A businessman in 26D, a college student in 30A, a mother traveling with her daughter in 29B. Sophia Ramirez captured it all, her live stream now showing rows of passengers with raised hands. 50 witnesses, she said into her camera. "At least 50 people on this flight are willing to testify that what just happened was intentional." "Horizon Airways, are you watching? Your captain just assaulted a passenger and we have 50 witnesses. What are you going to do about it?" Her viewer count hit 100,000, then 150,000, then 200,000. From the forward galley, Carol Preston was watching with growing concern. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Passengers weren't supposed to fight back. They weren't supposed to document. They weren't supposed to have a physician and a social media influencer and 50 witnesses all ready to bring the hammer down. She found Derek in the cockpit, his face pale. "We have a problem," she said. For the first time in 27 years, Derek Lawson felt something he wasn't used to feeling: fear. The economy cabin of Flight 892 had transformed. What had been a space of passive endurance, passengers quietly suffering through indifferent service and cramped conditions, had become something else entirely: an awakening, a mobilization, a collective refusal to stay silent any longer. Mrs. Dorothy Collins had taken an unofficial leadership role, moving through the cabin with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades managing classrooms full of children and knew exactly how to organize chaos into action. "If you witnessed what happened, I want you to write it down," she was saying to a cluster of passengers near row 28. "Time, location, exactly what you saw. Not what you think you saw, what you know you saw. Details matter." Sophia Ramirez was alternating between her live stream and direct messages with her assistant in Los Angeles. "I need you to pull everything we have on Horizon Airways," she dictated into her phone. "Customer complaints, employee reviews, any previous incidents. This isn't just one bad captain. This is a pattern. I can feel it." Her stream had stabilized at around 250,000 concurrent viewers, an enormous number for a spontaneous broadcast. Comments were flooding in from all over the world, people sharing their own horror stories about airlines, about discrimination, about times they had been mistreated and had stayed silent. But the most impactful conversation was happening in row 31 between Nate and Jason. I don't understand how you can be so calm, Jason said, his voice still shaky from adrenaline. He assaulted you, in front of everyone, and you're just sitting there. What would you have me do? Nate asked gently. I don't know. Yell, fight back something. And what would that accomplish? Jason opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't have a good answer. Here's what I've learned, Nate said. When someone treats you badly, your first instinct is to respond in kind, to match their energy, to show them they can't push you around. But that's exactly what they want. They want you to lose control because then they can point to your reaction and say, "See, I was right about him." So what do you do instead? You stay calm, you document, you wait. And then when the moment is right, you respond in a way they never expected. He paused. Violence and shouting are the weapons of people who have no real power. True power is patient. True power is strategic. True power doesn't need to raise its voice. Jason thought about this. It was the kind of wisdom that felt ancient and practical at the same time, like something passed down through generations of people who had learned to survive in hostile environments. You sound like you've done this before, Jason said. Nate smiled. Once or twice. The confrontation when it came started with Carol Preston. She emerged from the forward galley with the expression of someone who had been told to do damage control and resented every second of it. She walked to the center of the economy cabin and raised her voice. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand there's been some confusion about an incident that occurred earlier. I want to assure you that Captain Lawson is deeply sorry for the accident. Turbulence is unpredictable, and sometimes these things happen. It wasn't an accident, someone shouted from the back. I saw him aim. Another voice added, "We have it on video." Carol's composure cracked slightly. This wasn't going according to script. I understand you may have your interpretations of what happened, she said, her voice tightening. But I was there. It was turbulence. Any suggestion otherwise is simply incorrect. Mrs. Collins stood up, all 5 feet 3 inches of her with 76 years of moral authority backing every word. Young lady, she said, and the cabin went quiet. I've been flying since before you were born. I've experienced turbulence in every form imaginable. What I witnessed was not turbulence. What I witnessed was a captain deliberately pouring coffee on a passenger because he didn't like the way that passenger looked at him. I'm going to have to ask you to return to your seat. You can ask all you want. I'm not sitting down until I've said my piece. Mrs. Collins turned to address the cabin, her teacher's voice carrying clearly to every row. I spent 52 years in classrooms teaching children the difference between right and wrong, teaching them that bullies are not to be tolerated, teaching them that standing up for others isn't just a nice thing to do, it's a moral obligation. She pointed toward the cockpit. That man in there is a bully. He targeted a passenger for no reason other than prejudice. He poured hot coffee on him and blamed it on turbulence. And this woman, she pointed at Carol, was complicit. She sprayed air freshener at the same passenger earlier as if he didn't have a right to breathe the same air as the rest of us. You need to sit down immediately, or I will have you removed from this flight. Removed how exactly? Dr. Palmer stood up now, joining Mrs. Collins. We're at 35,000 feet. Are you going to throw her out the emergency exit? Carol's face reddened. I'm warning you both. No, I'm warning you. Dr. Palmer's voice was ice. I am a physician. I witnessed assault. I have documented everything. And when this plane lands, I am going to make sure that everyone involved in what happened today faces appropriate consequences. Medical, legal, and professional. You can't threaten me. I'm not threatening. I'm informing. There's a difference. Sophia Ramirez's camera caught everything. Her viewers were going insane in the comments, cheering for Mrs. Collins, and Dr. Palmer demanding justice, calling for boycotts. The tide had turned, and Carol Preston, for all her years of treating passengers like nuisances to be managed, had no idea how to handle passengers who fought back. She retreated to the galley where Derek was waiting. "This is out of control," she said, her voice shaking. "They're organizing. They have doctors and teachers and influencers. There are thousands of people watching online." Derek's jaw tightened. "It's fine. They're just passengers. They'll file complaints, nothing will happen, and we'll be flying next week like nothing changed. What if it's different this time? It's not different. It's never different. The union will protect us. They always do." But even as he said it, Derek felt the uncertainty beneath his bravado. This felt different. The way the passengers had rallied, the way that man in the hoodie had stayed so calm, so patient, as if he was waiting for something. What was he waiting for? Nate had seen enough. He had observed the gate agent's dismissiveness, the crew's arrogance, Carol's targeted humiliation, Derek's assault. He had watched good employees like Elena get silenced while bad actors like Carol and Derek faced no consequences. He had documented everything built. His case waited for the right moment. The moment had come. He pulled out his phone, not the burner he'd been using for notes, but a second device he'd kept hidden in his jacket's inner pocket. His real phone. The one with the contact list that included senators, CEOs, and the head of his own legal department. He scrolled to a familiar name, Catherine Shaw. The call connected on the first ring. "Nate. Is everything okay? It's been hours." "Catherine. It's me, Flight 892, Chicago Crew Base. It's worse than the reports. Much worse." He heard her sharp intake of breath. "Tell me." He spoke quietly but clearly, angling his body away from Jason to provide some privacy. Not that it mattered. In a few hours, everything would be public. The gate agents were hostile and dismissive, denied wheelchair assistance to an elderly couple, refused family boarding to a mother with small children. The crew arrived 22 minutes late and blamed traffic. That alone is enough to... There's more. The senior flight attendant, Carol Preston, sprayed air freshener at me, deliberately, in front of witnesses. A clear act of targeted discrimination. Nate. And then the captain, Derek Lawson, poured hot coffee on me. Claimed it was turbulence. It wasn't. I have at least 50 witnesses, including a trauma surgeon and a social media influencer who's been live streaming to over 200,000 people. Silence on the line. Then, you've been assaulted. On your own aircraft. By your own pilot. That's correct. I'm dispatching now. Who do you need HR? Legal, security, and make sure media management is standing by. This is already viral. There's no putting this genie back in the bottle. We'll be at the gate when you land. Are you safe? Do you need medical attention? I'm fine. The coffee wasn't hot enough to cause serious burns. But Catherine, there are passengers on this flight who've been treated terribly. A young man having anxiety attacks. An elderly woman who was dismissed and degraded. A young mother who was denied basic accommodations for her children. A doctor who had to step in because the crew wouldn't. This isn't just about me. I understand. When we land, I want everyone to know who I am. No more hiding. If we can't clean our own house in public, we don't deserve to run an airline. Understood. See you on the ground, sir. Nate ended the call and slipped the phone back into his jacket. Jason was staring at him with wide eyes. Who was that? Someone who's going to help. You called someone Catherine and talked about your own aircraft. Jason's voice was barely a whisper. Do you work for Horizon or something? Nate looked at him, this nervous young man on his first flight heading to the most important interview of his life, who had witnessed discrimination and assault and had chosen to stand up anyway. Today I'm just a guy in a middle seat. But tomorrow might be different. That's not an answer. No, Nate agreed. It's not. But you'll understand soon. Jason wanted to press further, but something in Nate's expression stopped him. There was a calmness there that went beyond ordinary patience, a certainty that suggested forces were in motion that couldn't be stopped. Whatever was coming, Jason realized the man sitting next to him had just set it in motion. From the forward galley, Carol Preston had been watching. She couldn't hear what Nate had said on the phone, the economy cabin was too noisy, but she had seen the call, had seen the intensity in his face, had seen him put away a second phone she hadn't noticed before. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She found Derek in the cockpit where he was pretending to monitor systems he had long since delegated to autopilot. The hoodie guy just made a phone call, she said. Looked serious. Derek didn't look up, so probably calling his lawyer. Let him. We have 27 years of seniority and a union contract that... Derek. Her voice was sharp enough to make him turn. I heard him say something about your own aircraft. What I couldn't hear everything, but I heard your own aircraft and the name Catherine. Derek's face went pale. Catherine. There was only one Catherine he knew of who would be getting phone calls about aircraft. Catherine Shaw, the COO of Horizon Airways. No. Impossible. The passenger in 31B was just some guy, some nobody in a hoodie and jeans. CEOs didn't fly economy. CEOs didn't let themselves get sprayed with air freshener and splashed with coffee. CEOs had people, protections. They didn't sit in middle seats on regular flights. Unless they wanted to see what really happened on their planes. Unless they were conducting some kind of test. Derek's mind raced through the possibilities. What if the man he'd been mocking, threatening, assaulting for the past 2 hours wasn't a random passenger? What if he was someone important? What if he was... No. That was paranoid. That was crazy. But Derek couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was approaching. Something that all his seniority and union protection couldn't save him from. Just keep an eye on him, he told Carol, and let me know if anything else happens. Carol nodded and left, but neither of them felt confident anymore. The ground was approaching, and with it, a reckoning. The descent into Los Angeles began at 10:22 a.m. Pacific Time. Captain Lawson's voice came over the PA system, but the usual bravado was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost mechanical. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our approach into Los Angeles International Airport. Flight attendants prepare for landing. The seatbelt sign illuminated. Passengers straightened their seats, stowed their belongings, prepared for the final phase of a flight that none of them would ever forget. Sofia Ramirez ended her live stream with a promise. Stay tuned. When we land, I have a feeling something big is going to happen. I'll update you as soon as I can. Her final viewer count, 312,000 concurrent. The hashtag Flight892 was already trending nationally. Mrs. Collins said a quiet prayer. Dr. Palmer reviewed the complaint she had drafted in her phone's notes app. Jason gripped the armrests with renewed tension, not from fear of flying this time, but from anticipation of what came next. And Nate sat perfectly still, watching the California coastline come into view through the window across the aisle, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. 25 years of building, 25 years of trying to create something that mattered, 25 years of believing that good intentions at the top would translate into good behavior throughout the organization. He had been naive. He understood that now. Culture wasn't something you could legislate from a corner office. It wasn't something you could implement through memos and training programs and corporate values posted on break room walls. Culture was what happened when no one important was watching. Culture was the small decisions, the daily choices, the accumulated weight of 1,000 interactions that either built trust or destroyed it. He had failed to watch, and in his absence, people like Derek Lawson and Carol Preston had built their own culture, a culture of contempt, a culture of untouchability, A culture where passengers were cattle and employees who cared were punished for caring. Today, that culture ended. The plane descended through a light haze, the sprawl of Los Angeles emerging below like a circuit board of streets and buildings. The ocean glittered on the horizon. The sun was bright and warm. It was a beautiful day for a reckoning. Derek emerged from the cockpit one final time. He walked through the first-class cabin without stopping through business class with only cursory glances until he reached economy. He stopped at row 31. "Hey, buddy." His voice was attempting casual but landing somewhere closer to desperate. "About earlier, no hard feelings, right? Sometimes these flights get tense and things happen that—" "Captain Lawson." Nate's voice was quiet, controlled utterly without emotion. "I have no hard feelings toward you." Derek's eyes searched Nate's face for something: mockery, anger, fear, and found nothing. Just calm. "Good," Derek said uncertainly. "Because I'd hate for a simple misunderstanding to become something it isn't. You know how these things get blown out of proportion sometimes. I'm sure they do. So we're good. No complaints. No social media drama." Nate smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but something about it made Derek's blood run cold. "Captain Lawson, I think we understand each other perfectly. What does that mean?" "It means you'll find out soon enough." Derek felt fear clawing at his throat. This wasn't how passengers talked to him. This wasn't the submission, the deference, the awareness of power differential that he was used to. This was something else. Something he didn't recognize. "Listen," Derek said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "I don't know who you think you are, but I've been flying for 27 years. I've handled passengers like you before. Whatever you're planning." "Captain Lawson." Dr. Palmer's voice cut through from the aisle. "We're about to land." "Shouldn't you be in the cockpit?" Derek turned and saw phones raised throughout the economy cabin. Dozens of them, all recording. Every word he said was being captured. Every threat, every desperate attempt at damage control. He was surrounded by witnesses with cameras, and there was nowhere to hide. "This isn't over," he said to Nate. "No," Nate agreed. "It's not." Derek retreated to the cockpit, the eyes of 50 passengers following him every step of the way. The wheels touched down 3 minutes later. Flight 892 had landed. But for Captain Derek Lawson and Carol Preston, the real turbulence was just beginning. The plane touched down smoothly, perhaps the only thing Captain Lawson had done well all day, and began the long taxi toward the gate. Passengers shifted in their seats, gathering belongings, preparing for departure. But no one moved toward the aisle. No one unbuckled their seatbelts. The normal rush to escape the aircraft was absent, replaced by a collective holding of breath. Something was about to happen. Everyone could feel it. Derek's voice came over the PA one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles. Local time is 10:47 a.m. Thank you for flying Horizon Airways. We hope you enjoyed your flight." The irony was so thick that several passengers actually laughed. The plane reached the gate. The seatbelt sign dinged off. And then, nothing. The jet bridge didn't extend. Carol Preston, who had been preparing to open the forward door, peered out the window and froze. "Derek," she called toward the cockpit. Her voice strained. "You need to see this." Derek emerged, irritated at being summoned like an underling, and pushed past Carol to look out the small window. His face went white. 3 black SUVs with Horizon Airways logos were parked on the tarmac, arranged in a semicircle around the jet bridge. Several figures in dark suits stood beside them, clearly waiting. But it was the figure in the center that made Derek's blood run cold. A woman with red hair, impeccably dressed, radiating authority from 50 feet away. Catherine Shaw, the COO of Horizon Airways. Derek had met her once at a company event 3 years ago. She had shaken his hand, thanked him for his service, and moved on. He had been one of hundreds of employees she'd greeted that day. But he remembered her, remembered the intelligence in her eyes, remembered thinking that she was someone you didn't want as an enemy. And now she was standing on the tarmac waiting for his plane. "Why is the COO here?" Carol whispered. Derek didn't answer. He couldn't answer. His mind was racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Maybe it was unrelated. Maybe there was an emergency. Maybe she was meeting a VIP passenger in first class. But deep down in the part of him that had felt something wrong since the man in the hoodie had looked at him with those calm, knowing eyes, Derek knew. This was about him. This was about what he'd done. And there was no union, no seniority, no 27 years of service that could save him from what was coming. The jet bridge finally extended, but the door didn't open for passengers. It opened for Catherine Shaw. She stepped onto the aircraft with the confidence of someone who owned every inch of it, which, in a sense, she did. Behind her came Robert Fields Horizon's HR director, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression that suggested he had been pulled from something important and was not happy about it. 2 security officers from airport operations followed their presence, making the situation feel official and final. Carol Preston stood by the galley trying to project calm authority and failing completely. Her hands were shaking. Her makeup was smudged. She looked like a woman who had just realized that everything she'd taken for granted was about to be stripped away. "Ladies and gentlemen," Catherine announced, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin. "Thank you for your patience. Please remain seated for just a few more minutes. This won't take long." Derek emerged from the cockpit, adjusting his uniform jacket in a futile attempt to look composed. "Catherine, what's going on? Why is HR here?" Catherine didn't even look at him. "Captain Lawson, please step aside. I don't understand what—" "You will. Very shortly." She walked past him through first class, through business into economy. Every passenger watched. Every phone was recording. Every breath was held. She stopped at row 31. "Mr. Crawford." Her voice was formal, respectful. "Are you all right, sir?" The name landed like a bomb. Crawford. For a moment, the cabin was absolutely silent. Then the whispers started building like a wave. "Crawford. Did she say Crawford? That's the—" "Oh my God." Derek staggered backward, his hand reaching for the nearest seat to steady himself. Crawford. Nathaniel Crawford. The founder of Horizon Airways. The man whose signature was on every paycheck Derek had ever received. The man who owned the planes, the routes, the company, everything. The man Derek had told to sit down, shut up, and know his place. The man Derek had poured coffee on. "No," Derek whispered. "No, no, no." Nate stood up. He removed his baseball cap, letting his face be fully visible for the first time. And then he stepped into the aisle, coffee-stained jeans and all. The reveal was complete. Sofia Ramirez had her phone up, instantly capturing the moment, her whisper shout audible to the entire cabin. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" She called him Mr. Crawford. "That's Nathaniel Crawford, the owner of Horizon Airways. The guy in the hoodie owns this airline." Her chat exploded. Her viewer count spiked. Across the world, thousands of people watched the moment everything changed. Jason's mouth was hanging open. You're... Mrs. Collins clasped her hands together. "Praise God." Dr. Palmer allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. "Well, that explains the calmness." And Carol Preston looked like she might actually faint. Nate surveyed the cabin, the passengers who had witnessed everything, the crew members whose careers were about to end, the team from corporate who had come to clean house. He had been invisible for 4 hours. He had experienced what his passengers experienced. He had seen the rot in his own company with his own eyes. Now it was time to cut it out. Nate stood in the aisle of the economy cabin, His gray hoodie rumpled his jeans, stained with coffee, his baseball cap now held loosely in one hand. He looked nothing like a billionaire, nothing like a CEO, nothing like the man whose name was synonymous with this airline. And yet, when he spoke, the authority in his voice was unmistakable. "My name is Nathaniel Crawford." His words were clear, carrying to every corner of the cabin. "I am the founder-majority stockholder and CEO of Horizon Airways. I own this airline. I own this plane. And for the past 4 hours, I've been sitting in seat 31B, watching exactly how my company treats the people who can't fight back." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children were quiet, sensing that something important was happening. Nate continued, his voice steady but weighted with disappointment. "I've spent the last 6 months reading complaints about this crew, about the Chicago base, about a culture of cruelty disguised as customer service, about employees who felt they were untouchable, protected by seniority and union contracts, and the assumption that no one important would ever see what they really did." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I didn't want to believe it. I built this airline on the principle that every passenger deserves dignity, every customer deserves respect, every person who boards our planes should feel welcomed, not tolerated." He turned slightly, addressing the entire cabin rather than any single person. "Today I walked through my own terminal and watched gate agents demean elderly passengers, dismiss young mothers, and treat wheelchair requests like personal inconveniences." He looked toward the forward galley where Carol was pressed against the bulkhead, her face ashen. "I sat in this cabin and watched a senior flight attendant spray air freshener at a passenger at ME because of what I was wearing, because of how I looked, because she had decided in the first moment she saw me that I didn't belong." He turned toward the cockpit where Derek was standing frozen in the doorway. "And I watched my captain. A man I employed, a man I trusted to carry passengers safely across this country, pour hot coffee on me and blame it on turbulence. I watched him tell me to sit down, shut up, and know my place. I watched him threaten me when I asked a simple question. I watched him mock me for wearing a hoodie instead of a suit." His voice dropped, becoming quiet but somehow more powerful. "He did all of this because he thought I was nobody. Because he looked at my clothes and decided I didn't matter. Because he believed that passengers in economy were cattle and he was the king of the cattle car." He turned to face Derek directly. The captain looked like a man watching his own execution. "Captain Lawson, you asked me earlier who I was. You wanted to know if I was a reporter, a blogger, someone who might cause trouble for you." Nate stepped closer. Derek tried to retreat but bumped into the cockpit door behind him. "I'm the man whose name is on your paycheck, or rather the man who was on your paycheck." He let those words hang in the air. "As of this moment, Captain Derek Lawson, you are terminated from Horizon Airways. Your career with this company is over. You will never fly one of my planes again." Derek's face cycled through emotions. Disbelief, denial, rage, and finally desperation. "You can't, my union. I have rights." "Your union protects you from unfair termination," Nate said calmly. "It doesn't protect you from assault, discrimination, and conduct unbecoming. We have documentation of every word you said today. We have witnesses in every row. We have live video that has been seen by—" He glanced at Sophia. How many people Sophia checked her phone? Current stream is at 480,000. The hashtag has over 2 million views. 2 million witnesses, Nate continued. Your union can negotiate severance packages and dispute performance reviews. It cannot save you from this. Derek's knees buckled. He grabbed the cockpit doorframe for support. 27 years, he whispered. I gave 27 years to this company. And in 4 hours, you undid all of it. Nate's voice wasn't angry. It was something worse, disappointed. You had a chance to be better today. When you walked through this cabin, you could have been kind. When you saw me in my hoodie, you could have treated me like a person. When you spilled that coffee, you could have apologized. He shook his head slowly. But you didn't, because kindness wasn't your default. Cruelty was. And that's not something I can train out of you or coach away. That's who you are. And it's not who I want representing my airline. Carol Preston was first. She had been edging toward the rear of the plane as if she could somehow escape through the aft galley and disappear into the airport. But there was nowhere to go. Security officers blocked every exit. "Ms. Preston." Catherine's voice stopped her cold. "Please stay where you are." Carol turned her face a mask of desperate innocence. "I didn't do anything. It was all him. I was just following orders. We have footage of you spraying air freshener at Mr. Crawford." Catherine's voice was ice. "We have witness statements about your treatment of passengers throughout this flight. We have complaint records dating back years, complaints that were dismissed, buried, or ignored." "Those were all I was cleared," the union said. "The union protects you from unfair labor practices. It doesn't protect you from documented discrimination and hostile behavior toward passengers." Catherine stepped closer. "You had 63 complaints in your file, Ms. Preston. 63. And somehow every single one was dismissed. That's not going to happen anymore." Carol's face crumpled. The mask fell away, and underneath was something raw and ugly. Fear, regret, and the dawning realization that the world she had taken for granted was ending. "Please," she whispered. "I have bills. I have a mortgage. I've been with this company for 23 years. "You should have thought about that," Catherine said, "before you decided that passengers were beneath your dignity." She nodded to the security officers. "Ms. Preston is suspended pending full investigation. Escort her off the aircraft. Collect her credentials." Carol went quietly, too shocked to fight. But as she passed Nate, she stopped. "This isn't fair," she said, her voice breaking. "I was just doing what everyone does. I was just... "You were just being cruel," Nate said quietly. "And you were counting on nobody important ever seeing it." She had no response to that. The security officers guided her toward the jet bridge, her sobs echoing through the cabin until she was gone. Next came First Officer Brian Foster. He emerged from the cockpit with his hat in his hands, his face pale, looking like a man awaiting sentencing. "Mr. Crawford, sir. I should have said something. I saw what was happening. I heard the things Derek said. And you didn't speak up." Nate finished for him. "You didn't intervene. You didn't protect the passengers who were being mistreated." "No, sir, I didn't." Why not? Brian's eyes dropped to the floor. "Because Derek is senior. Because I was afraid. Because I thought if I said anything, he'd make my life hell. He's done it to other first officers who crossed him. They got transferred to the worst routes, given the worst schedules until they quit. So you stayed silent." "Yes, sir." Nate studied him for a long moment. There was genuine remorse in Brian's face, genuine shame. This wasn't the defiance of Derek or the desperation of Carol. This was something else, the sick recognition of someone who had failed a moral test and knew it. "Mr. Foster," Catherine said, "you'll need to give a full statement about everything you witnessed, everything you knew about Captain Lawson's behavior, everything that was covered up or ignored." "Yes, ma'am. I'll tell you everything. And then we'll discuss your future with this company." "Am I fired?" Nate answered before Catherine could. "That depends on what you tell us, and on what you do next. Silence made you complicit. Speech might be the beginning of redemption." Brian nodded, unable to meet Nate's eyes. The security officer led him away, but gently. This wasn't an arrest, just a separation. And then there was Derek. He had been standing in the cockpit doorway throughout the other dismissals, watching his co-pilot led away, watching Carol sob her way off the plane, watching his world collapse around him. Now he stepped forward, and something had changed in his face. The fear was gone, replaced by something harder. Bitter. Defiant. "This is a setup," he announced loudly enough for the cabin to hear. "A kangaroo court. You're just going to fire me after 27 years of perfect flying. Not one incident on my record. Your record," Catherine said, "contains 47 customer complaints that your union representatives successfully had dismissed. 47 instances where passengers reported discrimination threats and abuse of authority. Every single one was buried. Because they were lies, passengers lie all the time. They make things up to get free tickets. 47 lies." Nate stepped forward. "From 47 different passengers over 15 years, all of them coordinated to target you specifically." Derek's jaw tightened. "You're not going to win this. I'm calling my union rep. I'm calling my lawyer. I have rights. I have protections. You have the right to legal representation," Catherine confirmed. "Robert will provide you with the contact information for our HR department. You can have your union representative present for any interviews." "Interviews?" Derek laughed bitterly. "You're going to interview me. After publicly humiliating me in front of the entire plane." "You humiliated yourself," Nate said quietly. "I just gave you the opportunity to do it in front of witnesses." Something snapped in Derek. His face contorted with rage, and for a moment it looked like he might actually swing at Nate. The security officer stepped forward, hand ready. "Captain," the officer said firmly, "please don't make this worse." Derek looked at the officer. He looked at Catherine. He looked at the dozens of phones still recording the hundreds of thousands of people watching the complete and total destruction of everything he had built over 27 years. The fight went out of him. "You'll regret this," he said to Nate, but there was no conviction in it. Just the empty threat of a beaten man. "I regret a lot of things today," Nate replied, "but this isn't one of them." Derek reached into his breast pocket and pulled out his company ID. The card that had given him access to cockpits, crew rooms, the inner workings of an airline he had once loved. He didn't hand it to Catherine. He threw it on the floor of the jet bridge. "This company is a joke," he spat. Nate bent down and picked up the ID. He looked at Derek's photo, younger, smiling, full of the promise that 27 years had corrupted into arrogance. "It was," Nate said quietly, "when men like you were in charge. But now it's a company in recovery, and the first step of recovery is removing the disease." He handed the ID to Catherine. "Get him out of here." The security officer took Derek's arm. The captain who had mocked passengers, threatened whistleblowers, and assaulted the owner of his own airline was led away like any other disgraced employee. His shouts about rights and lawyers echoed down the jet bridge until they finally faded. And then it was quiet. Nate turned to face the passengers who had witnessed everything. Mrs. Collins was crying quietly, tears streaming down her face. Jason looked stunned, overwhelmed, like he'd just watched a movie come to life. Dr. Palmer was nodding slowly, satisfied that justice had been served. Sofia Ramirez was still streaming, capturing every moment for the millions who would watch later. And Elena Reyes, the junior flight attendant who had shown compassion when no one else would, was standing in the galley with tears in her eyes. Nate walked toward her. "Elena," he said, "you helped a young mother when your supervisor told you not to. You apologized to me when your colleagues attacked me. You showed kindness when everyone around you was being cruel." "I just did what was right," Elena whispered. "Anyone would have—" "No, they wouldn't have. And that's the point." Nate turned to Catherine. "Ms. Reyes will not be punished for the actions of her crew. She'll be rewarded for them." Catherine nodded. "Ms. Reyes, please report to our corporate office tomorrow morning. We'd like to discuss your future with the company." Elena's eyes went wide. "My Future. I'm not in the habit of punishing people who do the right thing, Nate said. You're going to help us fix this, if you're willing. Elena couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face, and somewhere in the cabin, passengers began to applaud. In the weeks that followed, the consequences fell like dominoes. Captain Derek Lawson's termination was upheld by an arbitration board despite the union's best efforts. The evidence was simply too overwhelming, too public, too documented to dispute. His 27-year career ended not with a gold watch and a celebration, but with a viral video and a cautionary tale. He lost his pension, his prestige, and ultimately his marriage, which had been straining under the weight of his arrogance for years. Last anyone heard, he was teaching ground school at a small regional flight academy, his captain's stripes traded for a polo shirt and a classroom full of students who had all seen the video of his downfall. Carol Preston fared no better. Her lawsuit against Horizon Airways was dismissed within weeks, and she was ordered to pay the company's legal fees, a sum that forced her to sell her condo and move in with her sister. She found work eventually at a call center where she was monitored daily for the customer service skills she had so spectacularly lacked at 35,000 feet. But the positive outcomes were just as powerful, more so perhaps because they proved that good behavior could be rewarded just as surely as bad behavior could be punished. Elena Reyes was promoted to Customer Experience Training Director, becoming the youngest person to hold that title in company history. She helped design a new training program called the Flight 892 Standard, which became mandatory for every Horizon employee and was eventually adopted by 3 other major carriers. Dr. Victoria Palmer was granted lifetime first-class status, though she often chose to sit in economy, saying the view was better when you could see how people really treated each other. Jason Mitchell got the job in Los Angeles, and 2 weeks into his new position received a handwritten note from Nathaniel Crawford, wishing him well along with a card for 100,000 travel miles. He framed the note and hung it above his desk. Mrs. Dorothy Collins received a personal phone call from Catherine Shaw thanking her for her courage and offering her free flights for life. She donated the miles to her church's youth group and said the real reward was watching bullies held accountable. Sofia Ramirez's live stream became the most watched airline-related video of the year, eventually accumulating over 87 million views across all platforms. She was invited to speak at aviation conferences, featured in documentaries about passenger rights, and credited with helping launch a new era of accountability in commercial air travel. But when asked about her proudest moment, she always said it was the same watching a man in a coffee-stained hoodie prove that true power doesn't need a uniform. The hashtag Flight 892 became shorthand for accountability, and Horizon Airways' customer satisfaction scores rose 52% within 6 months, not because of better marketing or fancier amenities, but because of genuine fundamental change in how they treated every single passenger who trusted them with their journey. 6 months after Flight 892, Nathaniel Crawford stood before a room of 600 Horizon Airways employees at the company's annual leadership summit. The auditorium was full. Pilots, flight attendants, gate agents, ground crew executives, everyone. They had all heard the story. They had all seen the video. They had all felt the ripples of change that had spread through the company in the months since that fateful flight. Nate stepped up to the podium, still dressed simply. Dark jeans, a blue button-down shirt, no tie. He looked out at the faces watching him and smiled slightly. "I want to tell you a story," he said, "about a man in a hoodie who boarded a plane." The room fell silent. That man was told he didn't belong. He was sprayed with air freshener like he smelled wrong. He had coffee poured on him. He was told to sit down, shut up, and know his place. He paused, letting the words settle. And every single one of those things has happened to other passengers on other flights. People who weren't CEOs. People who couldn't fire anyone. People who went home feeling small, feeling less than feeling like they didn't deserve to be treated with basic dignity. He looked across the room, making eye contact with individuals, connecting with them. That's the real tragedy of what happened on Flight 892. Not what happened to me. I had power even if no one knew it. The real tragedy is all the people it happened to before who had no power at all. The elderly couple who got turned away at the gate, the young mother who was told to figure it out herself, the nervous first-time flyer who watched someone get humiliated and wondered if he would be next. His voice dropped, becoming more intimate. I built this airline because I believe travel should lift people up, not tear them down. I believe that for a few hours at 35,000 feet, we have the opportunity to show people the best of humanity or the worst. We can make someone's journey easier, or we can make it harder. We can treat them like honored guests, or we can treat them like cargo. He straightened slightly. The people on Flight 892 weren't cargo. They were teachers and doctors and young professionals and grandparents and children. They were people with stories, with hopes, with fears, and they deserved better than what we gave them. He swept his gaze across the auditorium. So here's what I ask of you. When you're tired, and I know you get tired, remember that the passenger in front of you is tired too. When you're frustrated, and I know you get frustrated, remember that the passenger you're talking to is also frustrated. And when you're tempted to judge someone by what they're wearing or where they're sitting or how much they paid for their ticket, don't. He smiled. Because you never know who's sitting in that seat. Maybe it's a billionaire testing his own company, or maybe it's just a regular person trying to get home to their family. Either way, they deserve respect. Either way, they deserve kindness. Either way, they're trusting us with something precious. Their time, their safety, their journey. He leaned slightly on the podium. I didn't set out to become a viral video. I didn't plan to fire anyone that day. I just wanted to see what my customers see. I wanted to feel what they feel. And when I did, I knew we had to change. He paused one final time. Change isn't easy. It requires looking honestly at our failures. It requires holding ourselves accountable. It requires choosing to be better every single day, even when it's hard, even when no one's watching, even when the passenger in front of us is difficult or demanding or dressed in a way we don't expect. He nodded once decisively. That's the Flight 892 standard. Not perfection, just humanity. Not luxury, just dignity. Not performance, just genuine care for the people who trust us to get them where they need to go. He smiled at the crowd. Any questions? There were none. Just applause that started somewhere in the back and built until it filled the entire auditorium. And so, Flight 892 became more than a viral video. It became a reminder for all of us that power isn't about uniforms or titles or first-class seats. Captain Derek Lawson thought his stripes made him untouchable. He thought his seniority made him right. He thought a man in a hoodie was beneath him. He was wrong about all of it. And maybe that's the lesson. You never know who's sitting next to you. The quiet person in economy might own the airline. The woman in the middle seat might be a surgeon who will save your life someday. The nervous kid on his first flight might grow up to change the world. Or maybe they won't be anyone famous at all. Maybe they'll just be regular people traveling from one place to another, hoping for a little kindness along the way. And here's the thing, they deserve that kindness either way. So the next time someone looks at you like you don't belong because of your clothes, your skin, your seat number, your ticket class, remember this story. Remember the man in the hoodie who stayed calm while a pilot poured coffee on him. Who didn't raise his voice, who didn't lose his temper, who waited, who documented, who let the guilty condemn themselves through their own actions, and then, when the moment was right, responded in a way they never expected. True power isn't about making noise. It's about knowing exactly who you are and refusing to let anyone tell you otherwise. If this story moved you, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been judged by your appearance? Have you witnessed someone being treated unfairly? Drop your story in the comments because the next video we make might be inspired by yours. Hit that like button if Captain Lawson got exactly what he deserved. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of justice served. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Share it with someone who has ever been made to feel like they don't belong. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that karma is real and that bullies eventually face the consequences of their actions. And remember, respect has no dress code. Until next time, stay kind, stay humble, and never underestimate the person in the middle seat.